And
Yep.
Now,
hey,
go.
And
hey,
I'm
it's Brian Andrews.
And I'm Jeff Wilson. And you're watching the Amazing Break It Down show with Pete Turner.
It is amazing, man, and I love you guys. I love having you on the show. That means that you guys are working and cranking out books, which is what you guys do for a living. By the way, check out where I am. I'm in the northern coast of Northern California. Not like San Francisco, but way up yonder, up back in logging country and weed country.
That's amazing.
I know. This looks like it's a snapshot from like some vacation catalog. That's literally live to the backyard right now.
Wow,
that's
awesome,
so
dude.
cool.
Yeah. We've got some great friends that lent us their house, and it's just fantastic. It's beautiful, and that view is just like the entire thing is crazy. So,
and next time you're live in that house, we're happy to be live in your studio.
Right? Yeah, let's do it. We'll do a writer's workshop up here and just pound out stories and just dun, like desk to desk, just writing back and forth. Actually, I wanted to ask you guys that. I know you work apart. Because you live in different places, middle of the country, back in the back over in Florida, nowhere near each other. But do you guys ever want to just sit in the same room and just crank away for 16 hours, or are you guys well past that point now?
I think that the problem is we've never done that, and now we have this system that works. And the other thing is, we were good friends when we started, but we're like best friends now. If we were 16 hours in a room, we ain't getting any writing done. I can tell you that, because we just don't spend enough time together. You know what I mean? So we're probably most productive doing it the way we do, but we do wish we could get together more. And now that COVID is easing off, maybe we'll be able to do a little bit more stuff together in the same place.
Jeff, though, you should totally read Pete and our writing, shared writing workshop, Virgin Islands, fantasy thing.
Oh yeah, no, that's what's to be read in on? Like, who doesn't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
We got to have, and we got to.
Jeff's like, we both buy a house in Virgin Islands. We'll have like a path that connects the two houses, and we'll build like a writing studio in the middle, and we'll just meet up and we'll brainstorm and write, and then we'll go back to our individual bungalows and.
We did decide that the pool needs to be a shared space too. Well, the Olympic-sized lap pool, but also the pool for the kids. So we're gonna have to sell a few more books to make this happen. I don't mind telling you.
Yeah, but you guys do sell books, though. I mean, you're talking about the way you guys crank them out, whether you're writing for the WEB Griffin series or your guys' own multiple series. You guys have gotten past the point of you've developed an audience. Of course, you want it to grow more, but you're not like, gosh, I hope we can sell 500 copies of this book. You guys are past that now. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, thank goodness, because we have kids and college coming up and all that stuff. So yeah, it is. It is a lot more fun though, isn't it? When you've got a base audience that want your product, and you're thinking in that terms of making people continue to enjoy what you do instead of breaking out. There's a little bit of a pressure release, a little weight off your shoulders where people like what you do. So it's a little bit more fun, I think. Some of the stress is gone.
We've covered a lot of your guys' working style in the past. I do want to get into a little more of it and just also cover it. For those that haven't seen, you guys have been on the show a bunch of times. Look in the show notes. You'll see links to all of the episodes. But I'm curious about that part of it. I mean, Jack Carr has done well. He's exited, and he's exited to the next exit. He's doing incredible. There are so many authors that are former military writing adventure thrillers. Is that fair to call them action thriller books?
Yeah.
Is the space getting too crowded? Do you care? I mean, every time I go to the grocery store, I see that rack of books as we leave, and I look to kind of get a sense for it. And if it's a masculine book, it's your guys' genre of book, regardless of who the author is. There are a lot of them, but is that space filling up?
I mean, I think that the space it's a crowded one in a good way, right? Because what you're seeing right now is, in the past, you had your Tom Clancy, you had Vince Flynn, you had Robert Ludlum, and these guys were great storytellers, great authors, but none of them had actually served. Right. And I think they did an excellent job of trying to tell the story from the operator's eyes, having never done that themselves. Right. Whereas now what you're seeing is, hey, there's a bunch of us, Jeff and myself included in the list. Like you said, Jack Carr, Don Bentley's another one, Josh Hood. And we're all guys who served. And now we're telling stories about what, we and our compatriots did. And so that's very exciting. And I think the market has embraced that. Would you agree, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's true. There's always that buzz, Pete, you know, in the head shed, if you will, about market saturation, and, you know, they sort of set up this mindset of competition. But I think that I can speak for Brian and myself when I say we don't really feel that that's a competition. Like, for one thing, people that read in this genre tend to be voracious readers. They're not people that are picking the 1 or 2 books they're going to read this year. Our average reader, we know, reads 2 or 3 books a month.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, if that's the case, then there's plenty of room, even with us putting out, you know, 3 or 4 books a year now, there is plenty of room for them to read all of our stuff and all of Jack's stuff and all of Don's stuff and Mark Cameron and Mark Rainey, and like, they're going to read it. You're not really in competition. Now, I suppose you could make the theoretical argument that at some point the market is saturated with story and ideas. And so that's challenging to make sure that you're coming up with something fresh and unique. But that's on us, right? That's our responsibility as writers. So it is a full market, but I don't think that the readers are sad about that. I think it's a great time to be reading in this genre because you got lots of choices.
Yeah.
A couple of things within that. So Jason Casper, another guy that deserves mention.
Yes,
He's a former Green Beret writing. I mean, there's so many, but this is a unique time in that Jack Carr, Navy SEAL, writes adventure novels. Jason Casper, no shit, Green Beret, writes adventure novels. You've got folks that have put their hands on the weapon, have put their hands on the enemy. I'm not taking anything away from you guys, but these guys specifically have done this job. It is remarkable to do that. Do you guys have to read other authors' stuff to make sure that you're differentiating? And then also, I'm curious, is Griffin's audience your audience, or are you guys writing to a different audience there?
2 very good questions. I'll talk about the first one first, and then maybe pass over to Brian. But I think that we don't get to read as much as we used to. I will tell you that there was a time when, you know, we were voracious readers, but not because we're trying to get a read on what other people are doing, just because it's our genre and we love it. One of the downsides, and I mean this with all sincerity, of being so busy with so many series at once, is I don't get to read like I used to. But I don't think I've ever felt the pressure to read their work for business reasons. I want to read their work because everybody on that list are phenomenal writers. And I think that if you're spending a lot of time doing the what if stuff, you know, the 3 of us have talked about that whole what if model for our writing. If you're spending a lot of time doing what if, you're going to come up with fresh, original stuff. Every now and then you'll see 2 books come out. Hasn't happened to us yet, but you'll see 2 books come out and you're like, oh, that's similar. It's not people stealing from each other. It's just, you know, they ask the same what if question. So I don't think there's a pressure to do it, but I wish I could do it more. I can tell you that.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna dovetail onto that. I think that when you're a new writer, you worry about people thinking, oh, did they get this idea from this person, or did they get this idea from over here, over there? And I think that in real life, you know, we're all watching the news. We're all reading periodicals. We're all inundated with so many sources of information that it's impossible not to pick up themes and absorb the same sorts of ideas. And if we're all clever and we're all trying to be cutting edge, of course, we're all going to try to jump on what we think the next trend in warfare or combat's going to be. And so you might see shadows of those themes in different people's books. But what's cool about it is, and this is where Jeff and I spend a lot of time talking about our world building and our characters. If you build a robust cast of characters and they feel real, and it feels like every time you pick up that book, you're going into their lives. Well, we're just one sliver. You know, think of our book as almost like one sliver of the intelligence community. They're dealing with one particular problem from their task force. There can be plenty of other task force and heroes and out there, because in real life there are, and they're tackling the same problem. It's just our take on tackling that problem.
And what about that question about Griffin's audience? Is that the same audience as yours? And do you have to use a different voice for that?
Well, so I'll tell you this. I think that we don't know yet, because our first installment in that series, book 9 in the Presidential Agent series, is our first installation, and that's Rogue Asset. But it doesn't come out till December. But obviously, we're at the point now where we're having those discussions. You know, what's the audience? We know that WEB Griffin's audience, especially for this series, because this is his one series that dealt with terrorism and more of the modern warfare stuff. His historical military fiction is phenomenal. Obviously, we mentioned to you before how a little overwhelming it is to write in the WEB Griffin brand, because he's so iconic. But this particular series is right in our space. And so we suspect, although we don't know for sure, that this is going to be a blend of people who have read WEB Griffin forever, people that will hopefully find it if they haven't been reading it, that have been following us, and those two will blend very, very nicely. But we're interested to see, I can tell you that.
Did you get a chance to meet Webb before he passed?
I have not. No, and sadly, I never did meet him in person.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
So I want to go back now and talk about how you guys work, just for the basics for the audience, and then. Do you guys work similarly enough that if you were in the Virgin Islands working together, would that vibe, or have you guys separated in how you do it just enough now that you kind of need your own thing?
Well, do you want us to go into our method a little bit? Like
Yeah, sure. Kind of like because two dudes writing books and you live, 1,500 miles apart. Help us understand that. And then are you too different to actually work in the same room together? Because wanting to and hanging out and working are different things,
Right.
I mean, now I can say from our past experience, there've been a number of trips where I've gone down to Tampa for different events and stuff. And Jeff and I have said, okay, when I'm down there, we're also going to have some working sessions, and we're gonna cram out some plot ideas and brainstorm and get, we'll write while you're visiting. And we never do. Like, we hang out. we
eat
visit
good food, we drink good wine.
Yeah. But you have to do that though, right? Like, you guys have to have that time. You have to be friends, and that also fills the well, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. For sure. This is a partnership, but it's a relationship too. We were friends before we were co-authors. So yeah, for sure. Part of our method involves, having a close friendship, which would hurt some co-author teams, I think. It just depends on what your method is. And so that's sort of a nice segue into what our method is, which is we do write simultaneously. So even if we were in the same place writing at the same time, we'd still have to be in different rooms because we're writing at the same time. And I think it'd be distracting to have Brian have that much access to me where he could just say, hey, wait, I got a question. Actually, it would probably be me saying that to him. But so the way we do it is we sort of arc out these books. We start with our what if question. We develop our story, and we won't get into all that. But basically, the mechanics of it is once we've sort of outlined, and we're not big outliners, but we have a rough outline of where we're going. We'll take the first act of the 3-act structure we tend to use, and we'll divide that act up into chapters and assign them to one or the other of us, usually based on point of view. We do multiple point of view stories usually. And so Brian will be writing chapters 1, 2, 4, 9. I'm writing the other chapters, and we're writing them simultaneously. And the only way that works is 2 things have to happen. One, when we're in the middle of a project, not in edits, but in creating the project,
right? We
talk sometimes 4 or 5 times a day, a minimum of twice a day, but 4 or 5 times a day to make sure we're on the same page. Because you're a writer, that you might outline whatever you outline, but it's changing as it goes. And so we have to keep each other in the loop. And then the other thing that we do is every few chapters, we switch those chapters. So I'll send him what I've done. He sends what he's done, and we will make a pass through the other. So I'll rewrite his chapters. He'll rewrite mine. That gives us that one voice. Then those go into a master file and never to be touched again until we get to developmental editing. So that simultaneous creation model would certainly make it possible for us to be in the same place if we had the maturity to do it, which we've proven we don't. But I don't think it would add anything, I guess is my point. Because, maybe in the brainstorming phase, it might be more fun to be, sitting on the porch with a nice bottle of wine. But when it comes to the actual mechanical writing, he's doing his thing while I'm doing my thing, we'd be in our separate cubicles anyway. You agree with that, Brian?
Yeah, I agree. But I think one thing that a lot of listeners might be curious to hear is that, we sort of have this, most writers, I would say, have a hands-off model, whereas we sort of are the opposite. So like a lot of writers are very possessive of their prose and their ideas and what they write. And it's sort of this closely guarded thing. You made this beautiful thing and don't touch it. It's perfect. Whereas for us, it's very much like, oh, you wrote this here. What if we tweak it like this? And we made me think of this, but we'll have to modify that. Is it okay if we go back and change this chapter? We need to change what you did, but it could be better. Oh yeah, that's fine. And so it's this constant tweaking. And it's like we're both painters and we're painting on the same canvas at the same time. And he's allowed to sort of paint on mine and I'm allowed to paint on his side. And if we didn't work that way, if it wasn't a free-for-all, everything's fair game for edits and change, I don't think the process would be as effective.
And that's hard though. And Pete, you can relate to this better than most people because that military background, working in the intelligence community, what it is to truly be a team. Ego has got to be put aside. It's team before self. It's mission before self. If you're able to do that, you can be successful in that space. And we've applied that and our backgrounds in that to this writing process. It sounds like something you just say on an interview, but there really is no ego. And enough writers to know that's hard to imagine, but there's really no ego involved in our process. We are totally a team. The product is ours. It's Andrews and Wilson. That's our brand. And so there's no personal individual ownership, and that's what makes it work.
This is a great point, and I want to spend a minute in this part of the ego thing, and then also talk about some tactic things. So, like the spy game, right? It's an ego-driven thing. I have to win this conversation. I have to go out and do these things. I have to be focused on my mission the whole time, and yet you have to surrender ego to actually accomplish it. You have to build trust with the person you're working with, and all these other things. So it's this balance of like you have to have a strong ego and be cocky and know that you can go into this impossible situation, walk out alive with the information. But if you're too cocky, you will overwhelm the conversation and you'll get played. Because if you give me the advantage of you having a strong ego, I will win. It's like a keto, right? Like I'll take all your energy and I'll do that.
Right.
And so, and this brings me to the other part of this conversation is because there are so many of you guys that are out there that have military backgrounds. You all know, like my ability to talk about intel and collection. There's really very few people that can talk at that level. So when you're writing it, you have access to me. You could say, hey, Pete, how does this feel? What would you change? And, I might tweet. And we're talking minor tweaks, everybody. We're not talking like I'm telling you, you've done it all wrong. It's not like that. But Jack Parr said a really interesting thing. I was asking him, I said, okay, you have all these detailed fight scenes. Like he's got the Kershaw knife and he jams it between his ulnar and his radius and he twists it. And then he comes up, very, very specific. He's like, oh, yeah. One of my guys who trains the teams, he puts on the gear, the exact gear the guy's wearing. He grabs the knife and he goes through and he pantomimes the fight scene and he films it. And Jack watches it and just like, and he writes it out as the guy does it. And so we have access to these guys. One of my former commanders, he commanded, if you can do this, he commanded a whole company full of counterintelligence agents. His brother is 35, I think, year Secret Service guy who's worked on the presidential detail for over a decade, right? So we have access to these people. Do you guys use these very knowledgeable sources to improve what you do? And then also bring that ego thing back in because there has to be times when you have to smash your ego down, but also in your guys' case, probably bring it up so that you are accounting for how good you wrote a sentence. Like, I have to fight for this sentence. This is a great line. Let's build the chapter around this whole thing.
Yeah, so I don't think there's ever any, and again, it sounds like something you say on an interview, but it really, in our case, is true. There's never a fighting for my sentence, his sentence, my plot line. We talk about things anytime there's a disagreement, and both of us are always 100% willing to say, okay, let's try it your way, and if we have to change it back, we will. So there's not much of that. In terms of the sort of SME stuff you're talking about, the subject matter expert stuff, that's a real key to this genre. And now more than ever, because for one thing, there's more experts writing in the space, but there's also a 20-year war that's just going on, there's millions of experts reading in the space, right? And so we really do want to get it right. And people that have served in the military, people that have spent time in, covert operations like you have, like I have, we do have a deep well of things that we can rely on. But there's plenty for every one thing that I know and can just write from experience, or that Brian brings to the table from his experience. There's 10 that we don't. And so it is a blessing to have kind of a deep well of relationships with teammates that we served with. But now we're even meeting new people. So a great example is in Collateral. We were able to reach out to some experts about how the Arleigh Burke works and how that, and like you said, you send it to them, and it's never anything major. It's always, It's like, yeah, as a skipper, I wouldn't say that. This is how I would say it. Or, well, I probably wouldn't have done, I would do this minor little change. But those little changes are what take it from just a book to something really, really incredible, because it gives it the authenticity. And there's no one writer who has enough experience to write all the elements of a complex geopolitical thriller. So being willing to reach out and exploit those friendships and relationships to make this thing as realistic as possible is definitely something we strive for.
There's a thing that happens in staff rooms. So here's an element that people don't think about, and is almost always missed in these kind of thrillers, is that the military's always also in mentor mode. So the commander's there, and they're like, Jeff, and he gives you instructions, and they're trying to guide you to take their spot one day, or to be promotable to the next level. And I've seen this a lot where, the commander's talking, the staff is there, and then like the number 2 guy is looking, and it's like brigade level. And the boss will look at the DCO or whoever it is, give him a look, and there's a whole conversation there that happens. You guys have seen this, where like, sometimes the commander will say, I think I want to know, and everybody grabs their pen and they write this down because they want to answer that question for the commander. But there's a lot of unspoken taskings. Like at one point, we had to report that the radio systems that we thought were in Iraq or in our area were actually gone. So every day the electronic warfare officers briefing, like, we have these radio systems, they broadcast in a 1.5K circle. And then we're like, no, there's nothing on those channels. And then the boss just turns red and starts rubbing his massive head, and he looks at that guy, and he looks at us, and he looks at that guy, and it was like he screamed at him, never said a word, and just like rubbed his head, And these kind of things happen. How do you guys account for that stuff? Like that stuff where like the commander's mentoring, he's advising, he's trying his best to not destroy someone in public. Sometimes they do get destroyed. But talk about some of that stuff, that tension that happens in the staff room, because being on staff is very dangerous. I mean, I've been killed in the staff room myself a bunch of times. But how do you guys account for those kind of things?
We have worked that in, and it's something that we try to do in this longitudinal character arc approach that we have to our series. So like Jeff was mentioning Collateral, that was the last book that we published in Tier 1, book 6. And, over the course of that series, Kelso Jarvis, who started Task Force Ember, he has been marching up his own, we sometimes say, you get promoted at your own peril, right? So he really didn't want to be promoted, but the president called on him and he's gotten promoted. So in getting promoted, there's a vacuum that he leaves behind, and he's taken a very active role in filling, who's going to replace him? Who's his heir apparent? So Shane Smith stepped into those shoes. And what we showed the readers is that Shane had a very different management style from Jarvis. And, there was this period of time where in the beginning, everyone on the Ember Task Force was like, I don't know about this guy. Like, I don't know. This doesn't feel right. Like, have we lost our way, or is this okay? And eventually they realize, no, we're okay. Like, Shane just approaches it differently. And Shane starts thinking about his succession and who could take over for him, and who in his staff could fill his shoes. And maybe the person he'd like to fill his shoes might not be the best person for that job too. Because you think about that. Okay, let's say you took John Dempsey and you want to make him in charge. Now you have your best field guy. You've taken him out of the field.
Right.
So maybe you think he should be in charge, but I can't take him out of the field because then I lose my star player. Right. So we work all that in because it's real life.
And in this new series, we have the opportunity to do it at a kind of a different level, Pete. So, the premise of Sons of Valor for our the fans of the Tier 1 series, they all know that the series launches, no spoiler here, book 1, the series launches with the Tier 1 JSOC SEAL team getting wiped out in an ambush because of leaking of intelligence. And the sole survivor, John Dempsey, goes on to assume this new identity and work for Ember to track down the people responsible. Well, the premise of Sons of Valor is that if that were to happen in real life, well, at some point they'd stand up a new SEAL team to replace it. And so that's Sons of Valor. Sons of Valor is that Tier 1 SEAL team with a fan favorite minor character from our other books, Chunk Redman, in charge of a squadron there. And so think about this. Imagine if the entire an entire unit like that, a very dark covert operations unit, was wiped out and you had to seed it from scratch. Right. Think of the leadership challenges there. You're not just bringing in some new guys, running them through green and then putting them into squadrons where they're going to be mentored by guys that have been there for 15 years. Everybody that sets foot on the compound that day is brand new to the Tier 1 and has never served there before. And so we are able to play out some of those, through one point of view. There's a guy who thinks that guy is not the right guy for this job, and then he's proven wrong, and you have to learn to trust your leadership. And so we do try to play a lot of those headshed things into the books instead of just doing the door kicking and all that. And it's really, really fun because you can bring a whole new insight, but it also gives you an opportunity to develop characters in a different way. Like, that's a real part of who you are in that world, how you interact with others. You might be the best door kicker in the world, but if you can't play well with others in the talk, you're going to have a hard time functioning, right? And so we try to blend all of those elements of these characters in, and it gives us a lot of rich stuff that we can play with for their relationships, etc.
There's also the other stuff that happens outside of the team. Like if you go to Danny's in Coronado and you get a little lippy with the wrong guy, you might find out that guy, he fucked your career up.
Right?
Like you have to be on your best behavior. You need to be rowdy a little bit because of the kind of guys you are. But you can say the wrong thing to the wrong person really easy, especially the young guys, because they don't know. Like they're still trying to prove. It's that alpha sorting. Like when you have alphas sorting amongst alphas. There's a maturity that has to happen to get to that point. Like I show up, I know that I cannot act like I'm any kind of an alpha at all. I'll outwork anybody there. But if I'm coming and I'm going to be an asset to these guys, I've got to shut up and just do my job and then be very respectful because I'm trying to enter into their team and I'm not staying long. I'm there short term. I'm just going to augment. And the last thing I need to do is piss them off. But I've learned to do, so I'll assert myself when I need to, but not on day one. I don't show up. I show up with ice cream. That's God's honest truth. I bring a barrel full of ice cream and I'm like, I'm here, everybody. I'm Pete. Here you go. So these things, it's tough to stand up a green team, especially if these guys are inexperienced guys. Some of them aren't going to be on the team in 6 months. Some of them aren't going to work out. They might go to another team and do well, but that's a hard challenge right there.
Yeah, and this afforded us another opportunity that we don't have in Tier 1. In Tier 1, this Ember unit they are a deep, dark group of a small group of people who are living in a knock indefinitely. So that's fun, but it doesn't give you, and you can play their relationships. And the people that have read the Tier 1 have seen a tremendous evolution in Lizzie Grimes, for example, who she was in book 1 and who she is now. But what we don't get to play with in Ember that we do get to play with in Sons of Valor, you brought up outside of the command. What about families? What about wives? What about children? And so in the Sons of Valor series, we have this enormous opportunity to look at that. And because our main character here is not just the door kicker, he's the officer in charge of an entire squadron, we are able to paint a picture of how important those relationships are in leadership. If your guys are not healthy and well, if your guys are downrange thinking about how crappy their marriage is or the trouble that their teenage son got into, they are not mission effective, right? And you need to be able to know that, which means you must have relationship with these people at a level that includes everything outside when you're functioning at a very high level. And so huge opportunity to have a great time exploring those relationships and some of the characters in Sons of Valor. You get to meet, in a minor way, but you get to meet some of the families, but you also get to see how they carry that family relationship with them into battle, and what effect that has, and what knowledge does a leader need to have to lead effectively. The single guy chasing skirt at Hot Tuna is not the same as the guy who's got 2 kids at home in middle school and a wife who works and is worried about those things. So it's been a lot of fun in Sons of Valor to be able to explore those.
And if you're working on any kind of a team at all, most likely everybody in that room has been divorced or is about to get divorced. Like that's it. It's just a fact of life, and there are occasionally people that survive that, but they're not the norm. I mean, and so there's a lot of family chaos going on a team at any point in time. I mean, any point in time.
I think that's right. But I think that one thing, I think it's a yes and no, because there's no question that there's incredible chaos and that had just in the job, and that the idea that that's not going to roll over and impact families is absurd. Right. But what my experience was, as I spent some time working in a team at that level. And what struck me is how not like CBS SEAL Team it is. Like, great show, but every relationship on that show is in peril every week, right? And they're all either divorced or their marriage is hanging on by a thread. And my experience was strikingly the other way. I'm not saying there wasn't a high divorce rate, there was. But by the time you get to the tier 1 units, those guys have been doing this for 10 years. And maybe some of them have been there for 15 years. Their marriages are a little older, a little more mature. They've already weathered the storm. And so what struck me as remarkable about the men that I worked with was how ordinary their marriages were. These guys would leave the command and head home when they were on not deployed, and pick up milk. There was a guy that was coaching Little League, and they're taking the garbage down to the curb. It's like, it's just not that horrific, every marriage is in peril that you see in TV and film. And one thing is that's refreshing, but the other thing is it gives you even more opportunity as a writer to flesh those out. Let's contrast. What is this guy doing right in his job that allows his marriage to be healthy versus this other guy? And so that's a fun character thing for us.
Yeah, and I guess, like, to illustrate that point that you're talking about, a lot of the guys maybe have already been divorced, but they've become a better partner, and they've also probably picked a partner more professionally. And then the other thing that they often put in as a story device, and it works, is like the secretive, I can't tell you anything aspect of it. But no marriage is really gonna dig the dude being like having to lie all the time to his wife about his job. Like, there has to be some trust and some honesty there. And so you can't tell your wife everything, or your partner, but there is that path that you have to get on as you become more professional. You do learn how to manage your home life. I mean, that's why, like, the military's, you will have a will, you will do this, you will have this plan in place, and then over time you're like, oh yeah, we actually do need these things in place to actually run a life. And it is interesting. I mean, like, when you go to pre-deployment and you go and you do all of your little, so it's for the audience, before you deploy, you go to all these stations, and it account for aspects of your life, either while you're deployed or back at home. Do you have a will? Do you need a Bible? Do you have dog tags? All of these things. And some of these things you have to, like, write down the code word in case Delta comes in to pull you out of a hostage situation. It's crazy things that go on in these things. And when you're new to this, it's a little terrifying to think, what word can I say if I have no teeth? Because my face has been bashed in. You're like, what can I mumble? These guys would understand. And those realities, that often doesn't make it into the stories, but that when you're young and you go through that prepping situation, it's crazy.
Yeah. And you also have to have a lot of faith. And like Jeff said, if you have a partner who is prepared to handle long periods of your absence. I mean, when I would deploy on the submarine, I knew that, the first mission is going to be, 75 to 80 days, and we're not going to communicate at all, zero,
Right.
So that's 3 months. I had to be very confident that my wife could handle anything that life and nature threw at her. Right. And, for me, I don't know if Jeff and I have talked a whole lot about this, but I mean, my approach was, I can't do anything about it, so I'm just not going to worry about it. So I just tucked it back in my mind, and I said, took sort of the maybe the unrealistic, happy approach of whatever comes her way, she's got it. I'm just going to concentrate on myself and the mission and what I have to do, and hope that when we finally get to come up and email downloads and I hear from her, you get to make that first phone call that, nobody died and everything's okay.
Yeah. It's funny when I watch Survivor and they have to go, whatever it is, 2 months, within this. And I'm not saying it's not challenging, but someone like you're like 80 days, no problem. I got it. I get to see my wife halfway through. Hey, that's great. So easy, Now you guys do have food and you're not in the rain, but you're also working harder than those guys are, It's funny when you see folks have to deal with that. But if you're not used to 45 days, 80 days, 100 days, some guys don't talk to their spouses at all the entire time they're gone. I think they're crazy, but that's what they do,
And I think the OPSEC has changed and with mobile devices now, it's different. It's different now than it was when I was in. We weren't transmitting email. I think they do that now. So, I think you have to worry about that too. Is there too much? Can you communicate too much? Do you start this pattern where there's this expectation that, operators and sailors should be allowed to, it's a right to be able to communicate with their families as opposed to a privilege? I don't know. What do you think about that, Jeff?
Well, I think that's right. And you think about, and of course I have nothing to compare to what you had to do in terms of communication. We each have our strengths and our weaknesses. And, I tell you stories, Brian, that you're like, man, I'm glad I didn't have to do that. I hear that and I'm like, I'm glad I didn't have to do that. Like the deployments that I did with the unit I was in, I could basically talk to Wendy every day. Like sometimes I talked to her twice a day and she would get a phone call and it would look like it was coming from a Virginia Beach phone number. And there was no OPSEC issues. We knew what we couldn't talk about. But at least there was communication. But one thing is like you're suggesting, the expectation that I, as a sailor, have that right. That's probably a real thing. Maybe not at that level of service, when you start getting into tier 1 units, and these guys have got some maturation and stuff. But there's also the impact that has on the family. So I can tell you, without telling you the story and all the details, there was a time when, I had been down for probably, I don't know, a month or so. We had talked every day, a couple times, twice a day. We're working mostly at night. So, just about the time we'd roll back in, it was a great time to talk to her with the time difference. She's, getting ready. So then something happened that we were, zero comms for 3 days doing something in a different place where we just didn't have any communications. She got no heads up about that. Now, for a guy that's only calling home once a week from some fob with the Army way out in the West, they would just shrug it off. But she's like, well, I talk to him every day. Something horrible must have happened. Like the most stressful part of the deployment was just that. I didn't talk to him for a couple of days. I didn't know that was going to happen. And it drove her insane. So I think that in addition to the impact it has on the service member, you can't underestimate the impact that you could be setting up for the family member who, gosh, if I haven't talked to him in 3 days and I usually talk to him every 24 hours, he's obviously something horrible's happened. So yeah, there's good and bad to everything, I guess, right?
That comms blackout can happen oftentimes on a holiday, and then if the family's hard to reach, it can be 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And you're right, it's terrifying. I had to build a secondary protocol, and I'm not trying to, the reason why they do this is for the audience. The reason why they do this is so that the family can be the first to be notified by a professional notification aspect of the military. So if something happens to someone, whether they're dead or significantly injured, they'll shut down comms back home. So I would have to do a lateral communication to my friend Paul or my friend Steve or whoever it's going to be. And then my significant other would know if they got an email from them that I was fine. They didn't have any details, but, just don't worry about it while this comms happen, because it's terrifying for the other person because they really do. I mean, what else are they left to think except for, that they're dead?
Which is another fun thing that you bring up, Pete, the little secret language that you and your significant other develop. Some of it is very intentional. And, Wendy and I actually sat down and worked out some little things that we could say to each other would let us know, hey, I might be moving to a different place or whatever. But it was really fascinating. And Brian would appreciate this as a psychologist. He was a psychology major in college at Vanderbilt. A lot of it that developed over time is very unconscious. Like, there are certain things that she would say, or I would say, that we knew what we were really saying without saying it. And we didn't plan it. We didn't design it. And you just develop this entire secret code of language to communicate and keep OPSEC intact, but still be able to let them know what you're doing and that you're okay, or that you might be gone for a bit or whatever. It's fun. And that's something that will be fun to work into these books as we grow the family relationships.
I love it. I love it. You're expanding the universe in this way, because there's so many of these aspects that we have to account for, because it is, going through pre-deployment, whatever it is, that's a thing. And we never talk about that. Like when you go through and they've like, hey, we've updated the software in the personnel system. You guys are the first rotation of deployees that we're going to, you're like, oh no. Here goes 20 hours of sitting in chairs and then doing like that, da-dunk, anybody listening, listen, if you're watching on Facebook, that's great. I love it. Do that. Continue to do it. But YouTube's my favorite place. So if you're going to listen to the Break It Down show, YouTube, hit subscribe, hit the reminder bell, and you'll always get notified. We're also putting out shorter episodes that come from the longer thing, because we found that people like those a lot. So you'll see that. And also, I'll put it on the link. If you want to get the spy shirts, you can get those. Just go to that link and order them there. Most of them should be delivering the next week or so. If you guys want to get Sons of Valor, go to Amazon. There's the link there. And within there, you can go out to all of the Andrews and Wilson's books. You can just use that link. That will help us out. We appreciate that. Let's talk specifically about Sons of Valor in a little more detail. I don't want to give the story away, but what created, you guys work so much. Why do you need to create a whole new team, a whole new series?
Part of it is we just can't help ourselves. So, if we could have like the Andrews and Wilson, if we could be like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where we have this whole, giant sphere of military characters and stories, that would be great. So, I think that it's that once you get to know these characters, like Jeff said, Chunk was a supporting character. He popped in and out of other series. But we started to care about the guy, and we started to ask questions like, what would his unit look like? What would it be like to operate under Chunk? And, Chunk is an interesting character from a storytelling standpoint too. He's not somebody I think we could have written right out of the gate. We needed to have a half dozen plus books under our belt before I think we had the writing chops to tell Chunk's story. And here is why.
Okay.
So many of our heroes sort of follow this very prototypical mold of, okay, he's a loner, but he has to do the right thing. He's got tragedy in his backstory. He's got demons he has to manage, but he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, and you can count on him to do the right thing. I think that sort of trope has become a trope because it's been used so broadly. But it is appealing because, the readers want to know, well, what drives this guy? Despite all the pain in his heart, why does he keep going? Chunk doesn't have a tragic backstory. He doesn't have a whole bunch of skeletons in the closet. He is carrying the weight of his team on his shoulders. But like Jeff said, this is a guy who's got his shit together. He's highly functioning. He's highly motivated. And his only major flaw is that he's all in. And so, how do you get readers to really latch on to somebody who seems like they have their act together? And so that's a challenge. And so I'll pass the baton to Jeff to talk a little bit about how we did it. But I do think he breaks new ground in our genre because of it.
And as a result, we had to be highly intentional about how we do it, because we knew we were sort of breaking the mold that we know works. Like, look at John Dempsey. Like, we've been hugely successful in tier 1 because John Dempsey fits that mold perfectly, right? And so there was a little anxiety as we first started brainstorming this. It's like, what's his motivation for doing the right things? He likes it. Like, it's not that, right? It's not that exciting. So what do you do with a character why is he still a SEAL after all he's been through? Well, all he's been through is doing something he loves. So here's this character whose motivation is, man, I love my teammates and I love being a SEAL. Right? And so it required quite a bit of discussion about, the risk of doing that, but also how to do it in a powerful way. And so what we needed to do with Chunk's character, where in a normal arc of the archetypical hero's journey, we would develop what motivated him in the loss of his loved one or the loss of his team in the case of Dempsey, and how that pushes him forward looking for vengeance. What do we give him that is just as powerful? And so what we gave him is love. We gave him a deep love of what he does and a deep love of his teammates. Mm-hmm. He would do anything for his teammates. He cares about, we just had a conversation about the importance of knowing as a leader that your teammates' family is cared for, that they're not concerned about those things. Chunk functions at the highest level in that regard to leadership. And so that was really fun to be able to grow him, that his motivation is his men. He is totally motivated by doing the job he loves and making sure that he brings his team home and protects them and their families. And so that was really, really cool. And like I said, when we started out, there was a little trepidation. Can we make it work? We probably weren't even a third of the way into the first draft of the first book before it became obvious it was going to work really well. But the way to make it work was to surround him with some interesting characters. And we needed to do something that was a little bit different. And here what we did that was different was we said, where are we now? If Chunk is standing up this tier 1 unit and, you know, this isn't 2002, we're 2021 now. This is a war that's been going on so long that he's got skills under his command that weren't old enough to remember 9/11, right? They were 4 or 5 years old. What's that like? What's, you know, and that's not really our generation, right? Like we all remember exactly where we were on 9/11, but now we have this new generation. And so the idea here is that we have this new generation of operators who don't bring 9/11 to the battlefield with them like we all did, but they still have patriotism, passionate love for country, love for their teammates. They fight for the guys standing beside them. So what does that new generation look like? But here's the part that was really fun. What does the new generation of antagonists, of the new generation of terrorists? Right. We now have this generation of terrorists who are fighting because when they were 3, they remember their dad fighting with the Taliban or fighting with Al-Qaeda, but they're tech savvy, they're multilingual, they're educated. Yep. This is a whole new threat. And as you know full well, Pete, this is something talked about in the real world, in intelligence circles and in special operations circles every single day. This is not the Al-Qaeda of 2006. Nope. It's just not. So what would that look like? And so in this book, we were able to suggest, you know, we focused on technology for the first book. What if, seeing how successful we are with standoff weapons in fighting the war on terror in Afghanistan and in Yemen and all these places, the terrorists were say, well, screw that. We want that advantage too. What if a group of highly educated multilingual terrorists could get their hands on their own drone technology and really be able to control it? What would that look like? And how would our good guys respond? So that's, I don't want to give away too much more of the story than that, but that's sort of the launch what if question that we asked here, and then built these cast of characters around that.
It always struck me how inexpensively you could entirely smash the American army. You know, like you take 70-year-old bombs, bury them in the dirt, and then everything comes to a grinding halt. Millions of dollars of degrees at the headquarters, all looking at screens going, what do we do now? You know, like just, and it's archaic old stuff that they're not even going to use, but just because they put it there, the system is circumvented by these things. And you're right. Like we want to be global, but if you have someone who's determined and patient, they have all the advantage of picking their time and making their move whenever they want. And they can be completely ingrained. I mean, we talked about the Chinese are like the Russians of the 80s. The Chinese, like they're in our colleges, they're on programs before they're even classified. So they're in ahead of time and everything's being flooded out. And there's a lot of truth to these things. But these are these stories that you're talking about. It's a fascinating time to think about what's next because, you know, we're desperate to go fight the Russians in the Crimea, but that's not really how things go. Like the Taliban, I would have to convince the commanders I worked with, Taliban's not going to line up in front of you. Chase them all you want, but they don't have a battle standard. There's no guy with the sword. You're not going to, have them surrender. You're not going to send them a letter via, white flag. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have to onesie twosies kill these guys, and they're just not going to cooperate. But they are going to kick your ass, though. Which
brings another really interesting question that we tried to incorporate into the book is, would this new generation, the son of the Taliban, the son of Al Qaeda, not only will their technology and utilization of technology, social media, and all that be different, but might their motivations be different? Might they might their politics be different? Might they not say, you know what, we got to stop killing fellow Muslims and focus on the real enemy, which is the great Satan across the pond? And so that was sort of a fun thing to have this new generation of terrorists come to life, in that they have learned lessons from the mistakes of their fathers, just like we have, which is what you're referring to. So it was fun to be able to play both sides of that and show an evolution of both antagonists and protagonists in this war on terror.
Yeah, that's really neat. I mean, I think about guys like Clayton Christensen, who's not with us anymore, but he was, the expert, the PhD on disruption. How do you disrupt the system? You just go take the class from that guy, and all of a sudden you apply it to your model that you're trying to attack. And it's like you're not intended for that purpose, but it could be used for that purpose.
We very much have taken the strategy of, we like an asymmetric battle space, right? And so that has been our model of operation, is be asymmetric, dominate all spheres, and keep your enemy sort of backed into a corner. And the minute, if you become really reliant on these advantages, the minute, like you said, Pete, if you throw sand in the gears and those gears stop turning, what happens? And that really is, like Jeff said, that's what we did in Sons of Valor. We said, what if, this technological advantage that we had through combat drones, what happens if you give one to the bad guys? Yeah. What happens if they can fly it? What happens if they figure out a way to use your own technology against you? It's interesting. We have to be ready for it, right?
The complacency, the arrogance that comes from complacency becomes a part of that too, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we've been hunting down sheep herders in the Hindu Kush so long that we're like, well, they're just they're heavily armed, tactically proficient sheep herders in the Hindu Kush. We don't even worry that much about our operational security of our own drone technology, perhaps, like we should. And maybe that's something we should think about. And so we try to introduce that theme too, that sometimes it's your own hubris that can be your greatest enemy as your enemy evolves. And so we try to address that idea of technological and ideological complacency and how dangerous it can be.
You think about, so the other day we were looking up at the sky as meteor shower is going to come around, and we saw all of a sudden these lights zipping across the sky. I'm like, what the heck is that? And then we finally figured out it's the SpaceX, low orbit communication satellite. And I thought, that's so cool that we're in this time. And then I thought, oh my gosh, you could go online, order whatever you wanted, and Amazon is desperate to get it to you in 24 hours or less, no matter where you are in the world. I mean, 10 years from now, anybody can order anything and have it go anywhere, with our own network of delivery and satellite, someone who's off in some part of Yemen. And all of a sudden you're like, bam, there's a Wilson or Andrews and Wilson book on their shelf, in one day, or a drone.
Or a drone.
Yeah. So these are great devices that I love that you guys are using. And I also love the fact that, and I know you guys do this kind of thing, take like two characters like myself and Johnny Walker. We're not on teams, but if we show up, or you show up to where we're at, we'll make your team better. There's no doubt about it. So you have these external characters that are only there with you for however long your rotation is. But I'm not leaving. How many times did a unit get pretty good at doing things and then leave and then never come back to that location? And if you've got a Pete or a Johnny there that can, think about Johnny Walker. It's so incredible. Is one, the SEALs say he can wear a trident on his chest. That's incredible. But two, they gave him a weapon and let him go on raids and act like a SEAL because he was a SEAL. He was part of the team.
Yeah, he definitely earned it. And that's something that's fun to play with too, is those what we think of as background characters can come really forward in a good novel. And so I'll let Brian talk a little bit more about this, but I think our readers are going to love Whitney Watts. I think that she is our solution to that. How do you make it more interesting by diversifying your cast of characters and showing how important the multiple levels are? So Brian, there you go.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, Whitney Watts she's our CIA analyst who gets picked up by the Tier 1. So she's now she's heading their N2 shop for Chunk's team. And she's our first female millennial character. And she's different than anybody that we've ever written. And we said, okay, she's not Lizzie Grimes. She's nothing like Lizzie Grimes. She comes from a completely different background, completely different space. And how is she going to fit in? And that was really, really fun. Yeah. To work her into the team. And it also really forced us to think about this idea of what is service. And through a lot of discussions, and you'll see as this is going to be a theme as we go through this series. But, from our father's generation, and it really has influenced, I think, our generation, there was this sort of belief and mantra that when you serve, it's a sacrifice. Serving your nation is a sacrifice. And that's the boomer philosophy. But is it the millennial philosophy? I think that, someone like Whitney Watts looks at her job and she says, I'm doing this because I want to do this. Like, you guys are crazy who are going to go say, this is a sacrifice. Look how much I've suffered serving my country. If I didn't want to be here, I'm not going to be here. So I want my passion and my purpose to be aligned. It's not a sacrifice for me to be here. This is my passion. That is a very different mindset, right, Pete, than sort of the previous generation of, oh, well, it only counts if you're miserable. It only counts if you're away from your family. Yeah. And it's you can pin it on your chest, very, very different approach between the generations. And we have this meshing through this character.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge there is we're not implying that Whitney Watts or real life intelligence or operators in the real world are selfish. We're not at all. That you can have both. Like this character has a tremendous sense of patriotism. She's serving her country. She's serving a cause greater than herself. Her mindset is just a little different, right? Yeah. And so you want to find that balance. Like a Gen Z or a millennial person in this space isn't less patriotic. They just are a little more pragmatic, perhaps, in their approach to how they apply that patriotism to their life and their career. And so sussing that out in a way that was palatable for all generations was really fun.
I love it. I love it that you bring in the female characters like you do, and also kind of looking at how they do it. I mean, I know from being a collector, if there's a female collector there, I'm stoked because I've got my way of thinking and my approach to it. And they're going to come up with something different than me, drastically different. And if you let them be pros, and you can guide, you can shape, you can like say, hey, a little less of this, more of that. It's not carrying the weight specifically. It's carrying a weight for the team. And if they pick up something, they find an avenue that's easier and safer to get the same mission done. Well, we can't have enough people like that. Like all this stuff about females not being in combat, that's too late. It's already been happening. I mean,
absolutely.
MP chicks. I always use this example, but there's this chick smoking a Marlboro. She's a gunner in a Humvee, and she's running a 50. And she just racks around with the butt in her mouth. She's like, all right, let's go. That's combat. I don't know what's the combat, And when people say, well, they get hurt more often, everybody gets hurt. The moment you deploy, you're hurt. There's no getting away from that. So I love that you guys are expanding this thing and not just making females, these secondary parts. Everybody's got to become a pro. Everybody deserves a chance to serve. That's how our military works. You educate yourself and you improve.
Diversity is a strength, and I don't just mean. This is not a political statement whatsoever. Right. I'm just talking strategically and tactically. Yeah, just like you were just saying, there is a tactical advantage to diversity, whether it's sexual diversity, whether it's ethnic, cultural. Having another set of eyes looking at a problem from multiple points of view is a tactical advantage. And you can have the discussion about, what the various roles are for different genders or whatever. Will a woman ever wear a trident? I don't know. There are physical differences between men and women. But that doesn't mean that they don't contribute. And this isn't news to people that are in the community, right? Like there were women deploying with us when I was with the unit.
Sure.
And
yeah. Again, not new.
And they weren't just like sitting in the hut on a computer. They were going outside the wire. They were working. They were badass. Yeah. And they had their own roles. But bringing that diversity to the battlefield gives you a tactical advantage. And if we don't reflect that in our books, then what are we doing?
I want to say this too, because a lot of people go on patrols, and not a lot of tier 1 guys do this, but like on a big unit, you go out, there's someone driving for the commander, might be a female, and they sit there for hours while I go and run my mouth and talk to some guy, and the commander talks to somebody, and they're alert and they're trying to keep me alive. We're hunted by snipers. They're looking for things. They're scanning. That again, it's also combat, and it's not easy. It's super boring, super uncomfortable to be out there in 120-degree heat while I'm out having lamb and chai and everything else. I mean, that is the reality. It takes that big of a team to let me go do, like, I am not at all worried about security when I'm doing my work because someone else is doing that for me. Whether it's a Sergeant Glass, this big, huge black guy, super tough guy, or it's some female who's keeping me safe by holding the vehicle and keeping it running, and so many different ways. So I love that you guys are telling these stories, man. I appreciate it. And everybody should definitely, right here on the story, right here on the show here, you can see the link. If you're on the podcast side, you can read it in the show notes. Sons of Valor drops in early June, and there's the link. Just go to Amazon and get it. You can pre-order it now. Fellas, anything in closing?
Yeah, I wanted to say I saw a question come up from the live stream about the next Tier 1 book, and we're working on it. Tier 1, book 6 was not the last book in the series. Dempsey and Ember, they've got plenty of missions left to go on. So rest assured, everybody who loves Dempsey and wants more Dempsey, he's coming back. And there's a lot of his story left to tell, and there's a big surprise we have coming as that series advances too. So stay tuned there. It's not going away. Sons of Valor is not replacing Tier 1. It's just a part of the universe.
Nice. And Jeff, anything for you?
The only thing I would encourage people to do is, if you're already a fan, you probably already know this, but if you're just learning about us for the first time, take 2 minutes, go to andrews-wilson.com. I think you have it scrolling there somewhere, and learn more about what we got going on. We have a whole bunch of different series coming out over the next few years, but we also have expanded our website to encourage our readers to engage with us a little more. That's always the challenge. And with all our technology, we decided it was time to take advantage. So we have a place where readers can engage with one another. They can engage with us. They can send us pictures. They can be posted on the website. So we really want to hear from you. We really want to engage with you. So we'd encourage you, come to the website. You can find the links to all the books, but also you can interact with us a little bit. We like that a lot.
All right, stand by, you two.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. And right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.